All right, welcome to your deep dive on Frantz Fanon. We're tackling colonialism and its lasting impact.
Oh, yeah.
And, even before digging into the research, the buzz around Fanon was pretty intense. Imagine this. The day he dies, French police are seizing his book, The Wretched of the Earth, from bookstores.
Wow.
Like, what kind of ideas get that kind of reaction?
And it wasn't just the suppression, it's the aftermath. Think about Simone de Beauvoir, a leading thinker of the time. She remembers Fanon's picture popping up everywhere in Paris.
Oh, wow.
He became an instant symbol, but of what exactly? That's what we're exploring.
Exactly. So is this just history, or are Fanon's ideas still relevant today? Do they hold up outside of that specific time and place?
Well, to understand Fanon, you have to grasp his core concept, the Manichaean world of colonialism. He's painting a picture of a world split in two, colonizers versus colonized, almost like two different species forced to coexist.
Okay, two different species sounds extreme.
Yeah.
How does that actually play out in the lives of colonized people?
It's about power, not just physical separation. Colonialism creates the system where one group gets to define the other as fundamentally different, lesser, even dangerous. And that's how they justify inequality exploitation, the whole system of control.
So it's not just about who's in charge, but how those in power create a narrative about the colonized that makes oppression seem natural, almost inevitable.
Exactly. And this othering has a huge psychological impact. Fanon talks about this relentless gaze that reduces colonized individuals to stereotypes. He even uses the phrase, look a Negro, to capture the feeling of being constantly judged, boxed in by someone else's limited view of who you are.
It's like always being on display, never seen for your full self.
I'm also struck by Fanon's analogy of antenna, this idea that the colonized person is always on high alert, sensing danger in every interaction.
Imagine living with that constant vigilance. It's exhausting mentally and emotionally. It shapes how you move through the world, who you trust, even how you see yourself. It's like internalizing the oppressor's gaze, seeing yourself through their distorted lens. And wouldn't this make everyday life incredibly stressful?
Absolutely. And it's why Fanon's work is still relevant. Even though classic colonialism may be over these power dynamics, this othering to justify inequality, they're still happening. Look at how we talk about class religion, even just different cultures.
That makes me think about how even seemingly subtle biases can have a huge cumulative effect on people, making them feel constantly judged and less than.
Exactly. And that brings us to one of the most controversial aspects of Fanon's work, which is his exploration of violence as a potential response to this system of oppression. Before we jump into that, though, it's important to understand the context. Were there attempts at the time to scientifically justify the idea that certain groups were inherently inferior?
Oh, you're talking about people like Professor Perot, right?
Precisely. He was a French psychiatrist who was very influential in colonial Algeria. He developed this whole theory about how the brains of North Africans were different from European brains, claiming they were more primitive and less evolved.
So he was basically using science to support the idea that Algerians were predisposed to violence and criminality, making colonialism seem like a necessary intervention rather than a brutal system of control.
Exactly. His ideas were used to justify all sorts of repressive policies, claiming that Algerians were incapable of governing themselves. It's a chilling example of how so-called scientific expertise can be twisted to serve the interests of power.
And Fanon saw right through it. He recognized Porot's theories for what they were.
Yeah.
Racist pseudoscience designed to dehumanize an entire population and legitimize colonial domination.
And it wasn't enough for Fanon to simply debunk these myths. He wanted to understand the real psychological impact of colonialism, how it warped the minds and souls of both the colonized and the colonizer. It was in this context that he began to explore the role of violence.
So given these psychological impacts, this constant pressure cooker of oppression, how did Fanon see colonized people responding? Was violence inevitable in his view?
Fanon didn't see violence as inevitable, but as a potential response to the violence inherent in the colonial system itself. Remember, he was writing from experience working as a psychiatrist in Algeria during the War for Independence. He wasn't just theorizing, he was seeing the psychological and physical wounds of colonialism firsthand.
So for Fanon, violence wasn't some abstract concept. It was the lived reality of the people he was treating, the people he was fighting alongside.
Exactly. And he used his clinical experience to illustrate his points. In The Wretched of the Earth, he shares stories of Algerian patients haunted by the violence they witnessed, consumed by guilt and shame. He also describes French soldiers grappling with the trauma of war, suffering nightmares and flashbacks. He's showing us that violence doesn't just leave physical scars, it inflicts deep psychological wounds that can take generations to heal.
That makes his argument about violence even more complex. He's not glorifying it, but trying to make sense of its role in a situation where people are systematically dehumanized, denied basic rights, and pushed to their breaking point.
And he uses this incredibly powerful image to get to the heart of his argument. He says that for the colonized person, killing a European is like killing two birds with one stone. It's a visceral image.
I know, but what do you think he's getting at with this?
It sounds like he's saying that violence in this context isn't just about attacking the oppressor, but also about destroying the internalized image of the oppressed that the colonizer has created. It's a way of reclaiming agency, even if it's a destructive one.
That's a powerful insight. It's about breaking free from the psychological shackles of colonialism, asserting one's humanity in a world that denies it. But Fanon doesn't stop there. He also recognizes the dangers of violence spiraling out of control, of becoming its own form of oppression. He emphasizes the need for discipline strategy, a clear political vision within any liberation movement. So he's not advocating for mindless violence, but rather trying to understand its complex psychological and political function in the context of anti-colonial struggles.
Precisely. And this is where his critique of nationalism comes in. He saw how the drive for national independence could become so consuming that it blinded people to the need for deeper, more fundamental change. He was wary of what he called the national bourgeoisie, those elites who were ready to step into the colonizers' shoes after independence.
It seems like he was concerned that these newly empowered elites would simply perpetuate the same systems of exploitation, just with different faces in charge.
He was. He saw them as more concerned with personal enrichment than with genuine liberation, more interested in maintaining their own power than in empowering the masses. He even accused them of becoming complicit in neocolonial systems, essentially trading one form of dependence for another.
And sadly, history seems to support some of his concerns. Many post-colonial nations have struggled to achieve genuine economic and social justice, falling prey to internal divisions, corruption, or continued reliance on former colonial powers.
It's a complex picture. And Fanon's critique of nationalism forces us to think critically about how power operates, even within movements for liberation. It's a reminder that achieving independence is just one step in a much longer process of decolonization.
So if nationalism could be a trap, what did Fanon envision as the path toward genuine liberation?
Well, for Fanon, true liberation wasn't just about changing political structures or economic systems. It was about a fundamental transformation of consciousness, a collective awakening to the possibilities of a different world.
That sounds incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
How did he imagine such a profound shift taking place?
He believed it had to be rooted in the lived realities of the people themselves, particularly the peasantry, who he saw as a powerful force for change.
It's interesting. Weren't the peasantry traditionally seen as more conservative, less revolutionary compared to more educated urban populations?
That's the common perception. But Fanon saw things differently. He recognized that the peasantry, by virtue of their position in the colonial system, had a unique understanding of exploitation and oppression. They were the ones working the land, producing the wealth, but denied the fruits of their labor. He believed they possessed a deep well of revolutionary potential waiting to be tapped.
But he wasn't naive about the challenges. He knew their revolutionary potential could be stifled by traditional hierarchies and the manipulations of the national bourgeoisie.
Exactly. He warned against anyone trying to use the peasantry for their own ends, whether it be the colonial powers trying to maintain control or the new elites trying to consolidate their own power.
So for Fanon, true liberation had to come from within the peasantry itself, not imposed from above. It had to be a process of self-discovery, of recognizing their own power and agency.
Precisely. And he saw the role of intellectuals and revolutionaries not as dictating terms, but as facilitating this process, helping the peasantry develop their own revolutionary consciousness, their own understanding of the world and their place in it.
That makes me think about the role of education, not just in the traditional sense, but in terms of consciousness raising, of helping people to see the world through a different lens.
And that's where the role of culture becomes crucial for Fanon. He saw culture, music, dance, storytelling ritual as a powerful tool for shaping consciousness, building solidarity, and inspiring resistance. He believed that by rediscovering their own traditions, their own ways of seeing and being in the world, colonized people could begin to heal from the trauma of colonialism and forge a new path forward.
So it's not just about political or economic independence, but about cultural reclamation, about regaining control of the narratives that shape our understanding of ourselves and the world.
Exactly. Fanon recognized that colonialism sought to suppress indigenous cultures to replace them with the values and beliefs of the colonizer. He saw this as a form of mental and spiritual violence, a way of undermining the very foundations of a people's identity.
And he talks about how colonized intellectuals often responded to this cultural assault in two main ways, right? Some completely rejected their own traditions, embracing the culture of the colonizer as a way of escaping their perceived inferiority. Others clung to their traditions rigidly, almost trying to freeze them in time as a way of resisting assimilation.
And he critiques both approaches, arguing that they are ultimately dead ends. He believed that true cultural liberation required a more nuanced approach, one that acknowledged the complexities of history, power, and identity. For him, it wasn't about clinging to the past or erasing it, but about actively engaging with it, transforming it in the service of a more liberated future.
So it's not about simply preserving traditions, but about using them as a foundation for creating something new, something that speaks to the present, while also pointing toward a more just and equitable future.
That's a great way to put it. And this creative process for Fanon is a vital part of building a revolutionary consciousness. It's about using culture to help people imagine and enact a different world, a world where their own voices, their own stories, their own experiences are centered and valued.
This makes me think about all the ways that art, music, literature, and even popular culture are being used today to challenge oppressive systems and create spaces for new voices and perspectives to emerge.
That's a great connection. Fanon's ideas about the transformative power of culture resonate deeply with contemporary social movements, where we see art being used as a tool for resistance, for consciousness raising, for community building, and for envisioning a more just and equitable world. It's about harnessing the power of creativity to fuel the struggle for liberation.
So we've talked about Fanon's emphasis on the peasantry and the power of cultural reclamation in the decolonization process. But there's another key element to his vision of liberation: the development of revolutionary consciousness. What exactly does he mean by that? So this revolutionary consciousness, is it something you're born with, or is it something that's cultivated? How did Fanon see it developing?
Fanon saw it as a process of transformation, a shift in how people understand themselves and their relationship to power. It's about moving beyond the mental and emotional limitations imposed by colonialism, rejecting those internalized narratives of inferiority and dependence that the oppressor relies on.
So it's not just about changing laws or systems, but about a fundamental shift in people's beliefs and perceptions.
Exactly. Fanon believed this revolutionary consciousness emerges through struggle, through the collective experience of confronting and challenging oppression. It's not just about reading the right books or listening to inspiring speeches. It's about actively engaging in the fight for liberation.
So the act of resistance itself becomes a form of education, a way of awakening to one's own power and potential.
Precisely. And Fanon believed this process had to be grounded in the lived realities of the people themselves. He emphasized listening to the voices of the marginalized, learning from their experiences, and building movements that were truly responsive to their needs and aspirations.
That makes me think about how important it is for those with privilege to step back and amplify the voices of those who are often silenced or ignored.
And to be willing to learn from those who have been most impacted by injustice. Fanon was also wary of charismatic leaders who tried to impose their own visions on the people, those who saw themselves as saviors rather than servants of the revolution.
So it's not about blindly following a leader, but about developing a collective vision that emerges from the shared experiences and aspirations of the people themselves.
Exactly. Fanon emphasized the importance of building movements that were decentralized, democratic, and accountable to the people they claimed to represent. He believed that true leadership had to emerge organically from within the struggle itself, rooted in a deep understanding of the people's needs and desires.
This reminds me of something we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
Fanon's vision for a new history of man. It wasn't just about tearing down the old, but about building something entirely new.
Right. And this vision wasn't rooted in utopian fantasies. Fanon didn't romanticize the Third World. He was acutely aware of the challenges they faced: poverty, illiteracy, internal divisions, the long shadow of colonialism. But he also saw a unique potential for radical transformation, a chance to break free from the constraints of the old world and create something truly just and equitable.
It sounds incredibly idealistic. Did he offer any concrete ideas about how this new world could be built?
He did. He believed in empowering the masses and ensuring that the process of decolonization and nation building was truly participatory. He talked about the need for a redistribution of wealth, a phrase that resonates powerfully with current discussions about global inequality.
So it's not just about political independence, but about economic justice, about ensuring that the benefits of liberation are shared by all.
Precisely. And this is where his concept of a new humanism comes in. He envisioned a world where everyone could live with dignity and respect, a world that recognized and valued the diversity of human experience while striving for a common goal of justice and equality.
That's a beautiful vision, but it seems incredibly challenging to achieve, especially in our current world, where we're bombarded with messages that emphasize our differences and pit us against each other.
It is challenging. Fanon himself was wary of simplistic notions of unity or universalism. He knew that true solidarity had to be built on a foundation of understanding and respect for difference, on a willingness to confront the ways that power operates to create and maintain divisions between us.
So it's not about pretending that our differences don't matter, but about recognizing and valuing them while also working towards a shared vision of a more just and equitable future.
Exactly. And that requires ongoing dialogue, a willingness to listen to and learn from each other, even when it's uncomfortable or challenging. It also requires a willingness to confront our own complicity in systems of oppression, to acknowledge the ways that we may be benefiting from the exploitation of others, even if we're not consciously aware of it.
That's not easy work, but it seems essential if we truly want to live in a world where everyone can thrive.
And it's a process, not a destination. Fanon reminds us that the struggle for liberation is never truly over, that it requires constant vigilance, constant education, and constant renewal. But he also emphasizes the importance of finding joy, love, and creativity within that struggle.
So it's about finding ways to sustain ourselves, to nourish our spirits, to keep the flame of hope burning even in the face of adversity.
Exactly. Because Fanon, despite witnessing so much suffering and injustice, never lost faith in the human capacity for resilience, creativity, and love. And it's that belief that shines through in his work, even in his darkest moments. It's a reminder that even amidst struggle, we can find moments of beauty, connection, and celebration. These moments nourish our souls and remind us why we fight.
Wow, this has been an incredible journey. We've covered so much ground exploring Fanon's ideas about the psychology of colonialism, the role of violence, the pitfalls of nationalism, the importance of culture and consciousness raising, and his vision for a new humanism.
And what's remarkable is that Fanon's work continues to resonate with contemporary struggles for justice and equality all over the world. He's one of those thinkers whose ideas stay with you long after you've finished reading. They challenge you, provoke you, and make you see the world in new ways.
To our listener, if you're feeling inspired to delve deeper into Fanon's work, we encourage you to do so. It's a challenging but rewarding journey, and one that's sure to leave you thinking differently about the world and your place in it.
And remember, Fanon wasn't about providing easy answers or simplistic solutions. He was about asking the right questions, the questions that force us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world around us.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Frantz Fanon. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep fighting the good fight.